Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
All right, well, good afternoon. My name is Adam.
I'm Hannah.
I'm Neil.
I'm Katie.
We're from the University of Washington, and it is our great pleasure to introduce you to APT, a new paradigm in mobile interactions. We have an app overload problem. As we become more dependent on mobile devices, we're getting worn down by the work of finding and maintaining apps for every aspect of our digital lives. Yet at the same time, we're also facing an app scarcity. Speaking to a broad range of app users helped us realize that apps can be hard to find, even if we think we know what we're looking for. The cost of finding and maintaining apps is preventing all but the most popular ones from being easily discovered, and we think even preventing some useful apps from even being made. Now, app scarcity and app overload stem from the same essential problem. Apps are high maintenance, and it's not necessarily their fault. It's more of a systemic issue. You see, we humans are embodied in physical space. We can only be in one place at a time, and frankly, this is a good thing. It means that we can divide our world into separate spaces for separate tasks. I mean, take for example our kitchen, where we can be really effective at cooking food because we only allow cooking-related items in that area. Now into our digital world, where anything can be accessed from anywhere, and for all the benefits that the superpower of data provides, in the words of Syndrome from The Incredibles, when everyone is super, no one is. I mean, this superpower of data means for all the work that I put in to get here today, I'm no closer to the data that enriches and enlivens this expo experience. What we need to do is realign our physical and digital worlds or face a future of app mediocrity. Now, let me flesh this out with an example. Let's say you have a friend who is really into gardening and they recommended this Community Gardens of Seattle app to you. You're passing by a garden on the way to work the next day and wonder, does that app relate to this place? So you start to search, but you can't remember the name at this point. Searching garden pulls up too many things, and then you go to browse, but would that be a health or a lifestyle app? You eventually find something that looks close, but to be sure, you're gonna have to download, which takes up space on your device and time. And when it finally does land, you have another decision, where to put it. Do I leave it where it lies, put it into an appropriate folder, a different screen? You usually don't want to deal with it, so you just leave it where it landed. And then it sits there, static, until you either open it, realize this is all you hoped for, and move it to an appropriate space. Or, as is more often the case, open it, realize it's not what you wanted at all, and like 85 to 90% of the apps that we download, you delete it. Now you may think this example is a little silly, and that's frankly half our point. Because of the work of managing apps, we don't think it's appropriate to have an app for this garden. It's just too much work for that data. We envision a different future. We envision a future where apps are searched not in the App Store, but out in the world. A future where location-based broadcast apps are sent out from institutions, businesses, individuals, even food trucks, so that we can manage and navigate our digital world, much as we manage and navigate our physical. Let us show you some of the promise of APT.
So let's dive into the interface a little more. App's interface is divided into 3 sections. At the top, you have apps that are permanent apps that you want available to you at all times.
Next, there are remembered apps, and they come up when they're relevant to your location and situation.
Finally, unexplored apps are apps you've never used before that apt is suggesting to you based on your context. The interface is supported by a few main features. First of all, we're changing how we think about apps.
Instead of having to download an app that will live on your device forever, apps are being broadcasted to you so you can use them in your time of need. An example of this is when Adam's receiving the train ticket app. Just by walking to the tunnel, he can buy his train ticket, and once he's gone, the app leaves his device.
Individuals can also broadcast apps, or they can pin them to a location for themselves or others to discover later. In the video, many people pin this app to Seattle's iconic gum wall, making it easier for Adam to discover.
Another feature is search, which is embodied in time and space, and this doesn't have to be the current time and space. App knows where Adam is heading and can help him search for food trucks at the end of his bus route.
The final feature is filtering. App takes into account Adam's search history, things he's liked before, his current location, the time of day, and his calendar, recommending Adam this cupcake app.
So this paradigm of just-in-time interactions is already being explored. A number of companies are working on similar services, with Google Now contextual information delivery service being the most recent example. But we think there's still some untapped potential here. What happens when we move from company-curated to crowd-curated experiences? How might this affect political, economic, and social life in the public sphere? For example, not very many people pay attention to proposed land use signs, even though they indicate a significant change that may affect their neighborhood. But what if there were an app pinned to this spot that could serve as an interactive and informative platform for community members to discuss the project? This could change how we make political decisions. Apps could curate shopping experiences to help us more efficiently navigate physical stores based on our preferences and values. Or how might apps interact with social networks? People could create unique experiences for their friends to explore in the physical world. So you may be asking yourself, are we even talking about apps anymore? And we think we're redefining this standard mobile interaction. With apps, we envision more agile, compact, and relevant experiences that find you when you need them. Consider what text messaging and social networking have done. We're tracing revolutions to them. What might richer mobile interactions do for the world? Thank you.
So first, the very compelling presentation, and I think you hit the key points. And actually, in some sense, there's one part that I think is even, you could go a little bit deeper, and that's simply that the more apps I have on my device, the more overhead, because every time I have to go away for a week, and I know when I go back, I have a slate at home that I'm going to take 10 minutes to have to upgrade all the apps that are stored on it, right? Because there's this notion of, because they are persistent, and the more things you have that are persistent, the more overhead just to maintain them. And it's just nonsense. So you're attacking something I think is really, really useful. There's this, I like the notion of this play between scarcity and overload being one and two sides of the same coin that isn't obvious until it's pointed out. And if there's no other value in the presentation, which there is, that in itself, I think, was a really good insight that made the time worthwhile. And then the quality of the videos and so on brought it out in the presentation. I guess the question is, coming back to Michael's earlier thing on the dark side, can you speak a little bit about if these things are so lightweight to come on to my machine and so easy to go, how do I know they didn't leave anything behind, for example? Or I didn't leave anything behind where I interacted with them that's untoward. How do you make it transparent and consensual?
That is a great question.
You don't have to have an answer. Just curious.
I think there's a lot of design patterns that would have to be looked at to understand what's the best way to address that in this sphere, because design is hard. We've presented what we think is a compelling vision, while at the same time there's a lot of detail we could go into of the research we did, trying to understand what technologies would support this and how would that work. I think it's pretty clear there would need to be some very well designed, curated, architected permissions and settings to a system like this to make sure there isn't abuse like that. But I don't know if you guys have insight into how that might be solved now. It's going to be a process, I think, figuring that out.
Yeah, I think one thing is just thinking about the model that's used to carry everything out. Maybe there just has to be a really good rule set built out, and maybe a good hierarchy of categories that help make sure everything's, I guess, safer.
Lovely. Hello. That was brilliant. That was just absolutely brilliant. I thought it was remarkable. I agree with the insight being clearly important. App management's a huge issue. My girlfriend arranges all of them on my home screens because I can't deal with it. It's too annoying. I guess the idea, the massive big thought of like software as a location-based service is really, really interesting to me and really powerful. I thought the video was incredibly high quality. In fact, it reminded me a lot of, and I mean a lot of, what we saw yesterday in the envisioning lab. And I guess that's my only critique point that isn't you're brilliant. Also, you present very well, which is a skill, so it's important. But it's kind of, it's like a single platform vision of the future, right? It's kind of the same thing that made me feel weird about the envisioning video, which is just one system runs everything. So it's just worth thinking about, because it's kind of like one of those science fiction-y thoughts, which is like, if this worked, if everybody used it, it would definitely work. But if they didn't, it wouldn't. So that's just my only observation, I guess. But yeah, it was beautiful.
I concur. It was amazing, beautiful, stunning, great music. The only critique I have is, and it's more of a question than anything, is if I go onto my smartphone right now and I look for an HDR photo app, there are 55 HDR photo apps that I can use. Exploding that into the physical space, whether it's crowd curated or not, I think creates a bit of an issue. If I'm at Pike Place Market and there are 1,700 apps that have been deposited or pinned to different areas around there, my ability to manage that is going to be just as frustrating as my ability to manage apps on my cell phone currently. Sorry, smartphone. God, I'm sorry. Or superphone. So I just thinking about that and talking to it and how curation winnows down that massive amount of applications that might or might not be interesting to me, may or may not be highly rated. Just pulling that number down so that management within that physical space doesn't become as frustrating or as cumbersome as managing it on my superphone. No, Bill?
So I'm just curious, was it intentional that your mosaic of all of the apps had a remarkable resemblance to the gum wall? and probably that what he's speaking about brings us to a point where in space, if you really were successful, it could probably be just as sticky kind of thing. But anyhow, that's about, but in some sense, the worst thing that could happen is you're overly successful, because then the problem just recreates itself, which is not a bad thing. It's just, it's interesting. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Thank you again.
Thank you.